wooden floors, walls, and windowsills.
They are the reason our country strives and gains. In order to benefit as a society, we must have a larger position on our foreign
That's
support.
very strong
For we
for
want to
us.
confirm that
Like
we
the
are
light.
able to create a significant change on Earth, which will transform the way we think about others. Embrace different cultures and experiences. Prove that we're all the same and deserve equity in a community that allows us to be who we are and engage with one another with strong nobility. For the future is now and the work will be hard, but Canada is strong and our resilience is rich.
She has right now. If it's gonna be long, because if it's gonna be long, we have to get out of the stage. This greeting, right? Because for Deborah's speech, we can just like here. For this greeting is like 15 minutes. I'm not gonna be.
Bonjour and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Winnipeg Youth Forum on Human Rights.
Bienvenue au Forum Jeunesse de Winnipeg.
Welcome to the Youth Forum in Winnipeg on the human rights. I am Gabrielle Mariou, and I'm a youth ambassador for Experience Canada150&Me, and I am honored to have been invited and to be your master of ceremony for the event of today.
Daniel Sadler, and I'm also a youth ambassador with Experiences Canada 150&Me, and I'm honored to be invited to be your MC at today's event.
Nous voudrions commencer en soulignant.
We want to start, we would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the territory of Treaty 1, which belong to the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, Dene, as well as the ancestral ground of the Métis Nation. Nous voudrions commencer en soulignant que nous nous trouvons sur le territoire visé par le traité numéro 1 qui a été négocié en 1871 entre la reine et le peuple Anishinaabe. Ce territoire est à l'heure actuelle le territoire des peuples Dakota et des membres de Dene. C'est maintenant mon honneur d'inviter ici le chef Dennis Mitchell de la Première Nation de Long Plains pour nous accueillir dans les terres traditionnelles.
Miigwech, zungwa begi new dijnikas, kaganushkitiak tuunje. Benassi tuotem. Good morning, all. We'll begin with a prayer song, morning prayer song. If you can rise.
Suka
It gives me a great honor to be here with you this morning. Such a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day to honor the Creator's blessings. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you this morning, especially the young people. Welcome to Treaty 1 territory. Our treaty was signed in 1871, August 3rd, and we're just a few years away from celebrating our 150th treaty relationship with Canada. So all of us here, we all have the heartbeat of Mother Earth within us through our bloodlines. We all are one and the same. For Canada, which we consider globally as one of the great countries of the world that has a stellar human rights record, there are some challenges among Indigenous people. For many of us, among us, there is a lot of discomfort with the 150, Canada's 150. And the reason for that is because throughout Canada's history, short history, there has been a lot of challenges relating to the Indigenous people and that treaty relationship, and in the area of human rights abuse. So throughout Canada, you may come across situations or positions of Indigenous leadership that may say, well, why are we celebrating 150? And I've had a difficult time to understand that also too, to figure this out. But I still, when I get up in the morning and greet the sun, I still believe that the Creator has given us His blessing. There is a lot of work to do in the area of human rights. Since the signing of treaty, we've had a difficult journey. And to this day, many First Nation communities are still struggling. You all know Canada's story, for the most part. Many of you are starting to relearn the Indigenous history as the way it should be told. And this building, for example, is a representative of who we are as Canada. The story of Indigenous people is a component of this sacred building. Just down the road from here, about an hour's drive, west of us in Portage Prairie, we have my home community, Long Plain First Nation. We have an urban reserve situated on within the area of the city of Portage Prairie, and there's a residential school there also too. So over the years, being involved in politics for 21 years, my goal is to partner with the museum at sometime down the road to help create the Indigenous Museum of Canada. And because the story that's being told here, I had some, being involved with this, I was a little bit concerned about how that story might be told, and was worried about whether or not that story would be told through the eyes of Indigenous people. So I'm hoping that they've been able to capture that for you, because you are the future of Canada, and we really have a lot of hope in you as young Canadians from all walks of life to change, to be the change of who we are in Canada. So there's a lot of work for you to do as you engage yourselves and as you recognize 150 and as you become adults and to work towards a better Canada and a better world. So going forward, the message of hope for Indigenous people lies within you, yourselves as young Canadians that are ready to take the reins of Canada and getting prepared for that difficult journey, as nothing is easy in this world, as we've witnessed throughout just a few days ago and throughout world history. But I think, I believe, I've always been an optimist. I was raised by my grandparents. They raised 8 children and 9 grandchildren on the Long Plain First Nation. My grandparents and parents went to residential school. My uncles fought. A lot of us we all have relatives that fought for Canada in the World Wars and Korean War. And even our Indigenous war veterans were treated unjustly. So going forward, the work that Canada needs to undertake, I mean, we see small gains being made, and the true partnership of that treaty relationship. For us, it's kind of difficult for me not to celebrate Canada's 150 when we just came through the Truth and Reconciliation report not that long ago. And I can't look at that and say, well, okay, this year 150, I won't acknowledge it, but 151, 152, right up into 2021 when we have our 150th treaty partnership with Canada, which is the August 3rd, 1871 treaty at Lower Fort Garry. So although I recognize there's a lot of challenges and human rights issues that we're contending with as Indigenous people, at the same time, I have to reflect on the small gains that we've made. And I'm hoping that as you go forward, we'll make greater gains for Canada. Because you do need, as Canada, a strong Indigenous population that has a strong economy, a better, equal standard of living, equal human rights, in order for us to declare to the world stage that we are truly the #1 country in the world for people that want to come and visit or live or immigrate into Canada. So those are the kind of things we have to think about as we go forward. And I recognize that there's a lot of work to do. And that really is my message this morning. It is a short notice, but I took the opportunity because to speak to the young people is so important, because you will be the driving force of Canada in the years to come. So I acknowledge you, and I wish you all the best with your day and your journey on Mother Earth, and give you ask for a Creator to bless you as you walk on Mother Earth. Miigwech.
Merci beaucoup, Chief Mitches.
Thank you very much, Chief Mitches.
Me, who is bringing greetings on behalf of the city of Winnipeg.
Hello, I'm Brian Mays. I'm a city councillor for the Saint Vital ward. Bienvenue, je suis Brian Mays. Je suis le conseiller pour le quartier de Saint Vital. I'd like to thank my unofficial photographer. We don't get a lot of staff at City Hall, so I quite often just hand my camera to someone in the crowd. So thank you for agreeing to do that, getting the youth involved right at the start here. If you go home tonight and you're talking to people, your parents or others, you may say, well, there was this political guy named Brian who spoke, and they may say, well, was it Brian Pallister, the premier of the province? And you may say, no, this guy was shorter than that. Or they may say, oh, it's probably Brian Bowman, the new mayor of the city of Winnipeg. And you say, no, this guy was older than Brian Bowman. But I'm the third guy, I'm Brian Mays. But I do have one significant job, I think, and that is that I'm the liaison with school boards and for youth opportunity at the city of Winnipeg. So I get a chance to come out and talk at schools and to a lot of young people about the work that we're doing in the city of Winnipeg with youth. So I really want to thank Experiences Canada, who have done a lot of work bringing youth together in this country, and the Canadian Museum for Human Rights have done a lot of work bringing together young people in this country. So thank you for the opportunity to speak and for putting on this forum. Just a couple of thoughts about human rights, and that is, when I was growing up in the 70s in Saint Vital in Winnipeg, Dr. Axworthy, who will be speaking to you in a few minutes, was a professor in the early 70s with my father at U of Winnipeg, and there wasn't much talk about human rights. It seemed almost a European or a foreign concept. It wasn't something you talked a lot about here, and if you talk to my sons, who are 13 and 11, I think they would say, well, I know we have this charter, the Charter of Rights. That's like a couple of hundred years old, isn't it? That's like when the country's founded, and it's just important to remember the charter didn't come in until around 1980, 81. It was actually signed in April of '82 in Ottawa, and people like Dr. Axworthy, who was in the federal government at the time, helped negotiate that. You know, it was man-made, and I use that term deliberately because in that era of Canadian politics, there weren't a lot of women involved, and we're doing a better job of that now, 35 years later. But it's important to remember, for the first thing I just want to mention is the human rights. It's an ongoing struggle. It's something where even in my lifetime, there's been huge progress in Canada. And also, I think it's important to remember, just a second thought, is you as young people can also make a difference. I'm sure you know the story of Malala Yousafzai, a young Pakistani girl who was advocating for equal educational opportunities for girls in Pakistan and was shot by those who opposed her and lived through that and has risen to become the youngest ever Nobel Peace Prize winner and has really become a model for the fight for human rights and the fight for equality throughout the world, and is still a very young woman. As a bit of a plug for Winnipeg, we do have a park in St. Vital, in my end of town, named Malala Park in her honor. So you can do some things as a young person and really have a difference. And I guess the third thing is, I was thinking about this morning, is to bring us back to U of Winnipeg, which I started talking about in the 70s. We've just started a program 3 weeks ago. The City of Winnipeg is funding, and U of Winnipeg is delivering a great program called Youth United at Winnipeg. And Youth United takes 10 suburban kids, like my sons may be eligible someday, but I represent a pretty suburban part of Winnipeg. 10 suburban kids and 10 inner city kids. They all work in inner city not-for-profit agencies during the week, during the summer, and then on the fifth day, they're all together in the classroom at U of Winnipeg. But what they're studying are the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and you heard Chief Meaches refer to that. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission looked a lot at residential schools and their legacy in Canada, and I think in the human rights context for people of your age, people of my son's age, that whole issue of reconciliation with Indigenous people is going to be a huge issue and something we can actually work on. It's not textbook, it's not history, it's something we have to deal with every day, and we are starting to deal with it, I think, more and more. And this Youth United at Winnipeg program is what we're doing at the city. And you know, the struggle continues. I talked to Hassan, from Calgary, who's here, who's talking to you later today, and I said, you know, you get to copy this idea in Calgary. So we talked a little about that. So the work continues on human rights, and part of that work will be in your hands. So on behalf of Brian Bowman, Mayor of the City of Winnipeg, and the other City of Winnipeg councillors, very pleased to be here to speak to you this morning, and wish you good luck today. And again, thanks to the Museum for Human Rights and to Experiences Canada for putting this on. I think it's something you wouldn't have seen 30 years ago, but it's something that's going to be very important to people of your generation. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Mays.
Thank you, Mr. Mays. The event of today is being webcast throughout Canada. We know that there's at least 600 youth that are following us. We want to wish you a welcome. We encourage you to please participate actively to the discussions by please forwarding your questions so we can ask them of our speakers, and later during the day you will also have a chance to share your ideas and perspective that we'll have seen during the workshop that you'll do in small groups.
And participants, we will be accepting your feedback from the breakout sessions prior to, during, and following the session. Webcast participants can send questions and comments by following these steps. Click the Participate button on the webcast player, enter your email address, and write your question in the space provided, then press Send. Alternatively, you can send your feedback following the breakout sessions or feedback to the questions we've posed to our dedicated email, which is forum150@experiencescanada.ca. To tell you a little bit more about Experiences Canada 150&Me, please welcome the President and CEO of Experiences Canada, Mesdames et Messieurs, Deborah Morrison, Presidente et Directeur Général de Experiences Canada.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. We are very excited to hear your thoughts and ideas today. As Chief Meach has said, Canada 150 is, for me, a milestone. It's not just an opportunity to talk about the past, but it's an opportunity to think ahead to the future. And now more than ever, for youth, this is a time in the world when youth are very vulnerable. They're targets for human trafficking and slave labor. For some, they live in extreme poverty. There are health issues. Some have no access to education. Some live in refugee camps. And as we sadly learned in Manchester just a couple of nights ago, now they're even becoming terrorist targets. So there are huge issues facing youth today. And this forum, in one part, we hope will be a call to action to engage all of you in becoming more active participants and finding solutions to address some of these problems. More than ever, youth today are focused on the world. They think globally, they're connected by technology. They think they can change the world in many ways that generations previous to them, although they always thought they could, you actually have the tools and technology to do it in a way that no other generation previously could.
But even though, if you are exploring the digital world, you can participate in communities of all kinds. The fact is that most young Canadians, when they reach 18 years old, they will probably have been to a foreign country, but they may have not visited another province in Canada.
Connect with one another seem to be growing fewer and fewer while the rest of the world opens up to you. And let's face it, you don't have to travel the world to take a look at economic and social justice issues. And there are many human rights challenges right here in our own backyard. Inasmuch as we can have an exceptional example in so many ways to show the world about diversity and inclusion, we are far from perfect. We have our own issues to resolve, and there are certainly many ways we could be doing things better or differently. So although that's a somber note, I have to say we're still very optimistic and excited about the possibilities of more Canadians growing up to be strong global citizens that we need them to be. And we wanted Canada's 150th to include an opportunity to encourage young Canadians to think first about Canada's own challenges and opportunities in that global context. Having that knowledge about the issues we face right here at home and learning more about the local and national organizations that are working to address them is an important step towards stronger, more effective global citizenship. So we asked you to tell us, what are the greatest challenges and opportunities we're facing in Canada for your generation? And over 2,800 of you have so far responded, with more youth adding their voices at every regional forum we present. Canada's reputation as a compassionate and humanitarian country resonated very strongly in the broad range of topics presented on human rights. In fact, human rights was the second most talked about topic, second only by a handful to those who wanted to discuss environmental issues. From among those submissions, we selected 150 youth to travel to one of 4 places to learn more about their area of interest and to get to know others that share that passion. 38 of them, whose work you saw earlier this morning displayed on the screen, have been spending the whole week here in Winnipeg learning more about social and economic justice challenges and working with extraordinary organizations like Manitoba Indigenous Culture and Education Centre, Habitat for Humanity, Winnipeg Harvest, Siloam Mission, and Resource Alliance for Youth, and learning about what they're doing to address them. Today, we're asking you to think about human rights in the context of ensuring equality here in our own communities, as well as considering Canada's roles and responsibilities to advance social and economic justice in other parts of the world. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, some of them emerging youth activists and leaders who will inspire you and show you that one person can indeed make a difference. And in just a few moments, you will hear from one of Canada's most well-known human rights advocates in the world and a very familiar face to Manitobans, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Lloyd Axworthy.
One important part of our project is to establish links between young Canadians and exemplary activists who work right now in this area, and to recognize the contributions of Canadians who really want a better country. We are proud of associating with the Order of Canada to celebrate 150th anniversary and to showcase some members of the Orders of Canada in all our events.
Is all of you. We've put a lot of time and effort into creating these youth forums so that we can hear your ideas, your concerns, and share your voice with the rest of Canada. After today's events, we will be choosing 38 of you from among both those of you on site here, as well as those of you following online, to become part of the delegation of 150 youth from across Canada who will travel to Ottawa between June 24th and July 2nd to participate in the National Youth Forum and Canada Day celebrations. At the end of the project, you will lead us in creating a milestone report on the issues and opportunities for Canada that today's youth care most about. So please do something that your teachers and youth leaders often don't tell you to do at events like this. Speak out, speak often, and speak loudly. Have a great day.
Merci, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah. There are several people that we want to thank for making this project possible. In particular, Canada150 and the program Les Jeunes s'engagent from Heritage Canada. We also want to thank our national sponsors, TD Bank, Great West Life, Mackin Foundation, and WestJet.
Canada150&Me's regional program partners include the Winnipeg Foundation, the Government of Manitoba, Parks Canada, Habitat for Humanity, Winnipeg Harvest, Siloam Mission, and the Manitoba Indigenous Culture and Education Centre. And finally, we would also like to acknowledge our travel partners, Air Canada and Via Rail. Supporting youth and promoting education and community engagement are cornerstones of our presenting national sponsors' community giving strategy. We are proud to partner with them in Canada150&Me project. It is my pleasure to invite Trent Wagner, Branch Manager, TD Bank Group, to say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Trent Wagner, and I'm here on behalf of TD Bank. I'm so pleased to join you all this morning as you begin a day filled with interesting conversations, the opportunity to connect with like-minded individuals, and build your skills and knowledge to continue to serve as agents we all need you to be. At TD, we are truly committed to making an impact in our communities, and that includes supporting forums such as this one, giving each and every one of you the opportunity to share with us, through your creativity, what the greatest challenge or opportunity facing Canada is for your generation. Canada's 150th birthday is the perfect opportunity to have this dialogue. We will celebrate what we have accomplished, reflect on what we have stood for, and focus on the progress we want to make going forward. We need all of you to guide us, engage us, and each other so we can start making this impact now. As we all know, the world is a rapidly changing place. As we become more globally connected, our responsibility to think about our impact more broadly also increases. Greater public awareness and community engagement is the first step in addressing some of the biggest challenges ahead of us, whether it is the environment, human rights, diversity and inclusion, or how we engage the world through trade, business, or development. Building that awareness at an early age will help ensure Canadians both at home and abroad set positive examples for social responsibility and building sustainable communities. Many of the challenges we face at home and abroad also require new thinking and new perspectives, which is why you have such an important role to play. Our job is not to simply leave these problems with you to solve. We need to support you and provide opportunities through forums such as this to help you develop your networks, leadership, and critical thinking so you can feel more confident to be bold in your thinking and empowered to know that small ideas and actions can lead to significant change. If I have one ask from you today, it is that you stay connected with everyone that you meet. Keep in touch and encourage each other to continue on the path to making the change you have set forth to do. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words this morning. Congratulations on your continued engagement, and happy 150 Canada. Thank you.
Merci encore, Trent Wagner. Nous apprécions beaucoup votre
Thank you very much, Trent Wagner. We appreciate your support.
Delighted to have here with us today manager at Great West Life, Michael Umbery, to say a few words and introduce our keynote speaker. Great West Life, one of Canada's oldest and best-known company, based right here in Winnipeg, was the very first of our national partners to lend their support to this project. So please show them how much we appreciate their being with us here today to see it all come to life.
Thank you so much. So thank you, good morning, distinguished guests, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Great West Life, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to what I know is going to be an inspiring and enlightening day. While we celebrate the birth of our country 150 years ago this year, we as an organization also celebrate our oldest company, Canada Life, which is also celebrating its 170th anniversary. Over those many decades, our country has written a collective history that has led us to where we are today. And as we look to the future and the great heights that we as a nation will surely reach, it is important to reflect on our past and better learn from it. Our country has made incredible strides as a land of true opportunity, where fundamental human rights are protected and all of our diversity is celebrated. As a company, we seek to harness and the advantages that come from our diversity within our society by ensuring equal opportunities for all of our workforce. In my role as the manager of talent sourcing, it's gratifying to be part of these efforts and to build an inclusive work environment that supports career development and opportunities for employees at all levels of our company. I'm extremely proud that Great West Life was selected as one of Canada's top employers for young people, in large part due to our environment of personal and professional development and the opportunities that we provide for young people to contribute positively to their communities. I'm also extremely proud that our organization believes strongly that it is our responsibility to give back and help build stronger communities together. Last year, we supported more than 900 community initiatives, including the Experiences Canada forums. As I look around this room, I know that our investment is having a positive impact by helping bring together so many bright young adults. So as you participate in this forum today, know that we live in a country where diversity is a great strength and where your ideas and views matter. To the many young adults who've gathered here, you truly represent the future of our country. So thank you, miigwech, merci. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Lloyd Axworthy taught at the University of Winnipeg before serving as a member of the Manitoba Legislative Assembly from 1973 to 1979. A Princeton-educated academic and student activist, he had a distinguished political career that spanned 27 years, 6 in the Manitoba Legislative Assembly and 21 in the federal parliament. Dr. Axworthy is probably best known for his term as Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1996 to 2000. His notable human security endeavors included the successful adoption in December of 1997 of the Ottawa Convention, an international treaty banning the production, use, stockpiling, and transfer of anti-personnel landmines. Dr. Axworthy was invested as a companion in the Order of Canada for his principled contributions in international human rights and for his leadership in post-secondary education, particularly in support of Aboriginal students. So please join me in welcoming the Honorable Lloyd Axworthy.
How are you? Morning. Welcome to Winnipeg and this wonderful metaphor called the Museum of Human Rights, which really stands as a strong beacon for this city, I hope for all of you across the country, as a place dedicated to the honoring, explaining, and educating about this idea called human rights. It's an idea. It doesn't come out of the ground. It isn't brought to you by the airwaves. It is very much a product, a result of people fighting, thinking, promoting, and using their God-given talents to try to provide for the welfare, well-being of other human beings. And I thought I'd start with a little story. I know what you're going to say. Here's one of these old guys who has old stories. This is not going to be a trip in nostalgia. But about, we're counting up years, let's just say about 6 decades ago, I was a student at Sisler High School in the north end of Winnipeg. And along the way, one of my teachers, R.J. Phillips, a very smart, tough history prof, said, look, our next class assignment is we're going down to the Civic Auditorium, that building some of you would know it's behind the Hudson's Bay Company, and we're going to listen to a politician, at which point large groans emerging from the class. What is this? Why are we doing this? He did give us a small incentive that if we didn't go, we'd lose 25% of our marks on that particular term. So, of course, we were all very enthusiastic. It was probably one of the most important events of my life. On that stage was a guy named Lester B. Pearson, more commonly known to Canadians as Mike Pearson. Maybe for a lot of you, that's just history. He had just finished receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in developing a peacekeeping operation that enabled, during the huge crisis in the Middle East, to separate the combatants and to provide a buffer zone so that a negotiation and a truce could be brought together. Well, that was his story, but it was more what he had to say. Mike Pearson was not what you call a Hollywood typecast political hero. No big chin, not much hair, had a little bit of a lisp. But when I walked out of that room, out of the Civic Auditorium, I had realized a couple of really important things that have stayed with me. I hope as this kind of experience will stay with you. First, Mike Pearson talked about what it was to be a Canadian. Now, I'm not being nationalistic or xenophobic. I'm not saying Canada first. He just talked about our history, beginning with our Indigenous people and the kind of culture that they were able to bring about in the way of resolving conflicts, of being able to talk to each other, giving everybody an opportunity to participate. And probably even more, a sign of tolerance. They had an immigration policy that allowed the rest of a bunch of people from Europe to come in at the same time. But he said that that history of honoring and recognizing differences was our strength. It wasn't a matter of being sort of conflict. It wasn't a question of challenging some sacred notion of identity. It was who we were. And over the years, we never fought a civil war to prove it. We never brought about a sort of regime that people had to adhere to one set of values. We didn't require provinces and regions and people from different backgrounds to swear loyalties. We said we want to provide a human right that gives people the right to choose, to make choices for themselves, to have enough freedom to be able to express themselves, to think creatively, to talk about things that may be not in the conventional wisdoms. And that we did it in a way that also kept our community together because we respected each other. Now, that didn't happen by accident. That was not just simply some kind of burning bush coming from on high. It was because people worked at it. Our forebears, forefathers, foremothers had really began to build a place called Canada in which there was different languages, different cultures, different backgrounds, and each was respected and acknowledged. One wasn't better than the other. There was no superiority. But we put that into important pieces of public policy, legislation. It wasn't just left up to some sort of mushroom-like growth. And I have to say, just to digress from a moment, Brian Mays, the city councilor, mentioned that I was a member of parliament, a member of the Trudeau government back in the 80s when we passed the Charter of Rights. And I can't think of anything in my close to 30 years of political life that I feel better about, of setting a framework in which everybody, this generation and future generations, will know that they have a basic degree of protection for their differences, and that we honor those differences, and that what Mike Pearson also said, third point, that we have to share that experience with the rest of the world. That's what makes us different sometimes as Canadians. We're not hiding behind our walls. We don't even build walls. We open up. We have open doors. We invite people in. We nurture talent from wherever it comes from. I mean, I grew up in this town, and Winnipeg's my home city. We like to think of it in grand terms, maybe a human rights city. It's really a cosmopolitan city. It's a place where all kinds of people have contributed to the benefit and the good results that enable them to make those choices, to provide a restraint on power, to make sure that people in government or in private sectors or in cultural groups or in religious groups didn't use their power to intimidate, to restrict, to restrain, but rather tried to use that power in a constructive way to build out. Yesterday I was in Ottawa at a ceremony honoring Mike Pearson, close to 70 years later. And what I said to the audience, this is not a historical reality. This has been a living reality for Canadians because we have intrinsically, internally, tried over the years, not perfectly, but tried over the years to represent that kind of spirit, that kind of outlook that Lester Pearson talked about. I walked out of that civic auditorium realizing much better what it meant to be a Canadian, dedicated to the idea of some form of public service. And thirdly, that for us to really live up to our vocation, to our special niche in the world, we had to open ourselves to the world and bring what we could to the solving of international issues, of reducing conflict, of protecting people. Oh, and by the way, and let me, before I leave the story of Mike Pearson, here was a really fascinating issue. When I was a foreign affairs minister, I became intrigued by this question. I want to ask you to think about it. Why is it that Canada, which in the Second World War was part of the major developments of nuclear power, we had the uranium, the technical skills, the science, the delivery, but we were the first country to say, yeah, we've got all those things. We could become a nuclear power. We could build bombs. We could be like little Pipsqueak in North Korea, walking around with his chest puffed up because he might find a nuclear weapon. We decided, and that Mike Pearson was then the foreign affairs minister, that we would simply not do it. We have no desire to do it as Canadians. And I remember reading a biography of a famous American diplomat, McGeorge Bundy. He said, isn't it interesting? We live next door to this place called Canada. And when they come down to talk to us, they're talking about how do we take nuclear power away from individual nations and use it as a threat? And maybe pull it together internationally. Find an international atomic energy commission that would make sure it would never be converted into weapons and put the world in jeopardy. That was Canadians who did it. Now, we've forgotten that. I think it's probably embedded somewhere in your history books. But it does speak to the question that that issue is still here. And when Deborah Morrison said, give us some ideas about where we go next, the question I think that needs to be asked, are we still prepared to fight the battle for the restriction and elimination of nuclear weapons? Well, I wasn't able to do that in foreign affairs, but I did something I hope lived up to that same Pearsonian spirit, if you like. After the Berlin Wall came down in the late 80s, early 90s, we got together as a government. It was Mr. Kretschmann's government to say, how do we rethink what we do in the world? It's changed. The old Cold War, the big powers sort of brandishing at each other for 30 years, which I grew up in. Horrible, terrible time. Dull, restrictive, nasty, mean. How do we open up? And in a discussion through the Department of then External Affairs, we said, let's try a new idea for Canada. Let's get away from the old philosophy of sovereignty and national security and defending governments and states. Why don't we talk about human security, the protection and rights of people, not governments, not nations, but people? That should be part of the Canadian agenda. That's what we would take to the world. That idea that people need to be protected. Is there anything more important today when we witness what's going around the world in Manchester, in South Sudan, in the Republic of the Congo, and 100 other places where people are being killed, executed, repressed? That protection, that idea of human security, but we also wanted to translate it into action. It's not just good enough if you say that concept of human rights as a way of enabling individuals to have a freedom to make choices. Not good enough to talk about. You have to do something about it. And what we discovered is that one of the issues that was emerging in the world was the whole threat and risk of landmines. What were they? There were a bunch of nasty little weapons left in the ground after soldiers and armies left. And 80% of the victims, which in those days amounted to close to 80 or 90,000 people, were women and children. Why? Because after the war was over and the armies left, it was up to the women to go find the firewood or to go out on the land, or the kids who simply wanted to play. I remember meeting a young woman in the Middle East who, and I'm not telling a story to be sort of raw or primitive this morning, but she had her entire arm up to her shoulder blown off by a landmine. It was a devious little device, brightly colored to make it look like a butterfly. And she saw it in the ground on her father's farm. And she said, well, that'd be a great little toy for my brother. And when she picked it up, the warmth of the palm of her hand detonated the weapon. Can you imagine anybody having that kind of mind, that kind of sense of destruction, that you would create a toy in order to destroy? Well, anyway, I'll make the story short. We decided that we would lead an initiative around the world, working in partnership with other countries, the Dutch, the Swedes, the Norwegians, Mozambique, Chile. It wasn't just a North American white guys thing, to get a treaty that would totally ban the use of landmines. We had as a major partner civil society, victims of landmines, people who had fought in the wars. The major sponsor of that was the American organization, the Vets for Vietnam, whose own young soldiers during the Vietnam War had been decimated by landmines. So we started a worldwide campaign. And when I say worldwide, this was hard-nosed street politics. We knocked on every door. Prime Minister, myself, other ministers, senators, parliamentarians, anybody that we could send around the world. And when everybody thought we were crazy. But we invited the world to come to Winnipeg, to Ottawa in 1997, and 120 nations signed the treaty. It was the single quickest disarmament treaty ever signed. But it wasn't seen as disarmament, it was seen as a human security protection of people issue. Today, the fatality rate has gone from 80 to 6,000 or 7,000. Landmines are still there. There's still places like Cambodia. There's still places like the Middle East where sort of in the Syrian and Iraq wars, landmines are being used. But just think what we can say as Canadians, that because of an effort we made, and it was high school students having pizza sales in order to raise money to help victims of landmines to get new prosthetics, young people holding forums about where do we go next? And the follow-up to that was the importance of establishing a rule of law. Some of you, I hope, will become international lawyers. I hope that you'll begin to see your vocation as out there building a regime of law that protects people. But here was the whole point of that initiative, is that most of the problems of the world end up being a result of some political figure, some president, prime minister, foreign minister, trying to exploit hatred and try to foment conflict. So we said, why don't we have an international criminal court and establish crimes against humanity? Those crimes included the taking away the rights of people, violating women by the use of rape, recruiting child soldiers. And we said, if you could hold the decision maker, the policy maker, the man or woman who's sitting not on the front lines, but sitting in the comfortable chairs back at the headquarters, who make that decision to fight, to kill, to maim, and hold them accountable, make them go to court, hold them up sort of as a criminal, then all of a sudden, it isn't so easy. And when I recall very, very vividly during the Balkans War, when we had decided on behalf of protecting of people that we would actually sort of use our own force along with other United Nations NATO members to stop the fighting in Kosovo. And Slobodan Milosevic, who was then the president of Serbia, was doing everything in his power to keep the war going, and at that time they were engaged in what was called ethnic cleansing, taking people who were Muslims and kicking them out simply because they were Muslims, not because they did anything more than be born with that religion and that culture. And it was only when we had set up a criminal court to try Milosevic and the people around him for committing international criminal crimes that he decided the game was up, and we were back at the peace table. And within 40 days, we had a peace treaty stopping the fighting. And after that, we also made a commitment to follow through and help rebuild those countries. It isn't enough to simply stop it. You got to help people rebuild it. And that led to what I hope is a principle maybe that you'll take a look at, or sometimes in your studies, called the responsibility to protect. Has any of you know what we talk about when we talk about responsibility to protect? Okay, so this will be a new one for you. After that war, we decided, look, we can't keep responding on an ad hoc basis. We need to have some basic rule at the United Nations in the community to say that it's the responsibility of every country who's a signatory to stop killing, to stop extermination, to stop expulsion. And so Canada set up a commission. The commission reported. Everybody again said, it came up with this idea that said, if a country won't protect its own people, can't protect its own people, or is the predator itself, then the international community has the responsibility to step in. Now that's a very revolutionary concept. It breaks all the old rules of sovereignty. It doesn't say you can't be sovereign. If you want to be sovereign, then behave yourself. Protect your people. But if you can't do that and won't do it, and I'm thinking vividly right now of what's happening, say, in South Sudan today. 2 warlords. 2 years ago, peace had been declared, are now fighting and killing and destroying to the point where there's a massive famine in South Sudan. Over 1 million refugees are leaving South Sudan to go to neighboring countries like Uganda and other places. Why? Pure, unadulterated greed. Because behind those warlords is a network. I think George Clooney and his wife Aka, who is an international lawyer, have called it the dark understate. They are people in Europe and North America and Russia, bankers, financiers, arms dealers, who all make money off the destruction of South Sudan and the people within it. Why? Because they've got oil, and the oil goes on the black market. And so part of the whole idea of protecting human rights these days is that you're going to have to come after not just those people at the top of the iceberg, the leaders. You're going to have to go after a lot of pretty slimy characters underneath who are working simply to exploit. And I'm going to give you an example of how it works. Last year, I met a group of young men and women in Washington. They were all maybe in their late 20s. They graduated from university. They were economists, computer specialists, lawyers, political scientists. And they come together for a small NGO project called the Enough Project. They were going to stop genocide. They were tired of large numbers of people being massacred. What they decided the way to do it is to follow the old political axiom, follow the money. So they began tracing how what we could now call blood minerals. I suppose many of you have one of these or close to it. You can't make a smartphone today without coltrane. It's a rare metal found only in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they discovered by their investigations that the big corporations, Intel, Apple, and others, were buying that particular mineral on the black market illegally, and therefore contributing money to the warlords who had been responsible for the killing of close to 2 million people. So what did they do? They went to those big companies and said, if you don't stop your purchase and buying of that mineral, we're going to name and shame you. We're going public to say that every time you buy one of these, you're contributing to the killing of an innocent person. In 3 weeks, they had stopped their purchasing and therefore created a totally different dynamic. We should be doing the same in South Sudan today, except we're not getting the kind of political will, because the one thing I want to talk about just is that if we look at that issue of where do you go from here, you'd have to say there's some dark clouds on the horizon. You've got political leaders, the Putins of the world, and the Duartes in the Philippines, and even the President of the United States, who no longer talk about human rights. In fact, they abuse them. And where I've seen that most evident and most obvious, I've been asked to become chairman of the World Council on Refugees. And that means that we're trying to reform the refugee system in order to provide for people to come with their rights being respected, their right of sanctuary, their right to flee persecution, their right to flee famine and drought from people. And one of the things we have to do, and this is, I think, where we as Canadians, because that council has been sponsored by the Canadian government and a series of think tanks and foundations here in Canada, is to try to reform the international system. To go back to what Mike Pearson talked about so many years ago, we need to have the policy and the institutions and the processes and the laws. So this is a matter of mobilizing people, of getting people together, of partnerships between civil society, undertaking individual kinds of initiatives, as many Canadians are now doing in welcoming Syrian refugees or Yazidis who are coming to our country to settle in and escape the war. But do you know that today, as we speak, there's over 21 million refugees in the world? That's 2/3 the population of Canada. And where do they go? Who looks after them? What rights do they have? Well, they have a right to maybe go to a refugee camp and survive. The kids don't go to school. Healthcare is not very good because the rest of the world doesn't really want to pay up for this. But over the horizon, and this is why this council is so important, over the horizon we could be talking about 60 million people who are totally disconnected, have no place to go, who are homeless, who don't have any rights at all because they don't belong to a place where there is a protection of rights. So you want to talk about forecasting, want to talk a little bit over the horizon, want to look at what we're going to do, then one of the issues, and I'm not saying this with any glee or any satisfaction, that the generation of Canadians who are now coming into maturity, coming into places where you can make choices, is how are we going to deal with the mass movement of people around the world who are escaping conflict, escaping war, escaping famine, escaping drought, and escaping ethnic or religious persecution. And my own experience internationally is that we're one of the few countries that people expect will have the courage and the conviction and the resources to actually provide some leadership. So there's an issue for you to think about. How do we deal with this question of the protection of the rights of refugees and migrants and people who are escaping starvation? And it takes me back to, I think, a call to action from a philosopher, no less, Charles Taylor, who's one of Canada's great minds, great thinkers. This is what he said about the future. He said, our age and the age following will make higher demands of solidarity, benevolence on people today than ever before. Let's just stop there, than ever before. Never before have people been asked to stretch out so far and so consistently and so symbolically and systematically, as a matter of course, to the stranger outside the gates. I hope in your discussions you'll find out how you can stretch out to those strangers beyond our gates. Thank you very much.
Merci, Dr. Awardy. Nous avons maintenant quelques minutes pour répondre.
Thank you, Dr. Exworthy. We have a few minutes to answer questions, well, put questions, answer questions. So line up behind Adam and Kalins, who are both ambassadors, and you can put your questions in French. We'll be translating them. We'll take one question at a time, and Mr. Axworthy will be answering.
Questions to come forward and line up where our youth ambassadors are standing in the aisleway with microphones. There will likely going to be a lot of questions, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. For those of you participating online, please go ahead and send in your questions or comments, and we'll bring them into the conversation after we've taken a few from the live audience.
Okay, so we're going to start with Adams.
Hi, I'm Adam from Saskatoon. You talked a lot about nuclear weapons and kind of like the place that they have in the world. Do you truly believe that the world would be better off with nuclear weapons? Obviously, they're devastating weapons and should never really be used, but if you think about it, since they were used at the end of World War, we've never really had a true total war between two major powers. There's always been the mutual assured destruction. Neither power really wants to attack each other, knowing that they both have nuclear weapons. And we've kind of deterred a lot of wars in that sense. And you can even look at the Ukraine fairly recently. They got rid of their nuclear weapons and then kind of look at them now with Russia. So obviously I'm not advocating the use of nuclear weapons, but do you truly believe that the world would be better off without nuclear weapons as a whole? Thank you.
Well, two quick answers. One, there simply can't be a nuclear war. If it ever happens, we're done. There's just no way that the world could survive any kind of major nuclear war or exchange. So simply as a pure matter of insurance, you have to do everything in your power to reduce the risk. And secondly, that risk increases because of the sort of spread of nuclear weapons to other countries. You could say maybe there was a time when Soviet Union, Americans, and the Brits and stuff could kind of work out a system of red phones and communication. But the more there is a nuclear sort of distribution, look at what's happening in North Korea. Do you really want to have a government that is so patently insane be having nuclear weapons at its disposal? Because again, it's the human factor. They push the button and away it goes. So I still think, and I'm not just going back in history, I really think that that still represents one of the great challenges. We may not eliminate them, but maybe we go back to Mike Pearson's view. Let's control them. Let's make sure that they're not subject to this kind of individual whim and caprice of somewhat off-center, illogic, and sometimes totally sort of capricious governments and leaders in those governments. Yeah, okay.
My name is Leah Schwartz. I'm from Winnipeg. So our country was built on immigration, and our economic and cultural growth depends on the diverse strengths immigrants bring. We have a dual responsibility to welcome immigrants to our country as well as to ensure the safety of our citizens. In light of Monday's events in Manchester, England, can you formulate your perspective on reconciling our mission to provide a welcome home for those in need with the obligation to guard the safety of Canadian citizens? Thank you.
I think right now that whole issue of refugee and migrants is so large that no one country can absorb. Now, let's deal with hard reality. There are countries. I'll be visiting one in this summer, Jordan, which has 1.6 million Syrian refugees. I mean, we get a little excited here when 300 cross our border. They've got 1.6 million refugees in their country, and they're one of the poorest countries in the world. So part of the work of the council that I'm now chairing is to say, how do we share the burden? How do we share the responsibility? And I think there's two ways. One, to make it much easier for a place like Jordan to provide the support for the refugees on their soil. Secondly is to, I think, take a look at what are the numbers we think we could take as Canadians, and more importantly, can we use our leadership to try to encourage and persuade other countries to open their doors. Right now, there are European countries that used to be fairly sort of tolerant who've shut their doors. They won't accept anybody. They're closing down. There's a kind of a shrinkage of our commitments in so many parts of the world. And I think one of the things we can do as Canadians, through our government, through our individual sort of discussions, through talking with youth groups in other countries, is to say, if we're going to have a stable world, we have to make use of those talents. I mean, refugees are people. They're smart. They can do it. Canada's been built, basically, by people coming here. We had a strong Aboriginal, Indigenous community, which we didn't treat very well, as Chief Dennis Meaches said. But if we want to continue to prosper and be who we are, we just need people bringing their incredible talents in this new age of sort of automated information, data development, the technologies. We just need people who've got those kind of skills. So I think there's a benefit, but I think there's also a fundamental issue of rights. And part of our job is to make sure that those rights can be properly shared, and so doesn't become an exclusive and very limited outlet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Claire Beck. I'm from Corner Brook, Newfoundland. Since a lot of us are planning to go to post-secondary school very soon, what courses and subjects would you recommend taking to be able to do what you do, to work for international peace and human rights? Thank you.
Could you repeat that just the last part, just a little louder?
What type of subjects and courses for university would you recommend us taking for that type of job?
Yeah, I don't think there's any particular just one path. I mean, in university and graduate school, I did my work in English, political science, economics, and history. I think the idea of becoming educated is the major thing, and to use that education to apply judgment and commitment to providing some of that kind of public involvement, that citizenship that Mike Pearson talked about when I heard him speak here in Winnipeg so many years ago. I think, however, one of the areas that I think is really becoming of opportunity, I'd like to see our students here in Canada, in the high schools and in the universities, become much more active, engaged with their counterparts, their peers in other parts of the world where education is being denied. And as we know, through the magic of distant education and learning, but we could be doing an awful lot more to ensure that those kids in the refugee camps who have been denied education for the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years are given an opportunity to do that. And I think I've seen projects where universities and high schools have taken up just connecting, talking, sharing, and that itself, I think, could and should be part of our education. Just that outward community learning that we share as Canadians with other people, and with people in our own country who don't have it. I was president of the University of Winnipeg for 10 years, and the proudest thing I think we achieved together as a university is that we started out with a participation rate of about 5 or 6% for Indigenous students. When I left, it was 14%. We just opened the door.
My name is Lakita, and I'm from Vancouver, BC. And my question to you is, how has the evolution of democratic freedom, feuding with intellectual activists, and religious freedom changed society on a national level?
Well, I think we could go right back to the French Revolution, if you like, and say that those activists created a fundamental change from a hierarchy and an elite to open it up so people could participate with their vote. I think the activism is being shown actually in a lot of places today. I described the role of activists in civil society, say for the landmine treaty. Well, maybe the same activism now has to be put in place to get the United Nations and the kind of people in the United Nations to be much more effective in stopping the conflicts and getting and holding account the governments like what's happening in South Sudan or Republic of Congo. And the activism is around issues. There's a gender issue. There's still a substantial discrimination against women having equal economic and social rights in most countries. And it's the dumbest thing possible, because if women are not involved, then you're never going to be able to provide blossoming. I'm going to be very personal and very political. I watched President Trump speak to the Arab countries at the beginning of this week, saying, we have to go after terrorists. No argument with that. But he said, once we get those terrorists, then things will blossom in the Middle East. No, they will not. Saudi Arabia and Yemen and the Gulf states and Egypt will never provide that blossoming and flourishing if they don't open their human rights portfolio to include 100% participation of women in that society. And that is a very strong and important part of activism, I think, for people today.
So we have several online questions, and I'll start with just one. We have Linda, who asks, do you think Canada has a responsibility to solve its own problems, such as gender equality and the plight of Indigenous peoples here at home, before taking on those of an international scale?
I don't think it's either or. I again want to go back, I guess, to my own experience. If you are going to deal with gender equality and the rights of Indigenous people, you have to do it. There is no dividing line between domestic and international. We have, for example, the International Convention on Indigenous Rights. If we were to adopt that in this country, it would change substantially the way in which Indigenous people have those rights exercised here. So one of the great benefits of having international treaties, establish standards, norms. You know, you have to live up to these kind of things. Similarly, the world has just passed the Paris agreements on climate change. We better make sure that we live up to those agreements. But how do we do it? We're going to do it domestically by cities, provinces, companies undertaking a restriction on emissions and building some new green technology. So there isn't a dividing line anymore. I mean, we're all living kind of in this integrated system. And the question is getting the balance. And that's why I think this trend line that we see, where people are saying, well, I'll stand up just for my country. You can't be an island anymore. And those who say it are just running against the fundamentals of the way the world is today in a global system.
Good morning. I'm Warrant Officer 2nd Class Paneek Gale from 861 Silver Fox Royal Canadian Air Cadet Squadron in Abbotsford, British Columbia. You mentioned that we should be more, for international affairs, we should be going out to other countries who are unable to protect those like their own citizens. Do you feel that we as Canadians should be enlisting in our armed forces? Do you feel that we should take a more active role in our military responses, similar to how our neighbors down south do? Or should we be continuing our peacekeeping operations?
Yes. But let me just give you a little fuller answer. Peacekeeping has changed dramatically. One example is that for many years, peacekeepers could not protect people. They couldn't use their skill. Now they can, but the reality is that a lot of developed countries, including our own, don't want to participate. Do you realize, I mean, we like to talk about, again, Mike Pearson as being the originator of peacekeeping. Do you realize that we have 68 peacekeepers in the world? We're number 70 on the list because, you know, previous governments simply didn't want to participate. And yet, and they shut down the training, they shut down the education. And that's where I come back to just the question before. You can't be really effective peacekeeping if you're not developing the institutions in your own country to encourage people to do it. And I think that one of the big advantages of some of the new technologies is that you can do peacekeeping much more effectively. I've met students who are developing, for example, robots to take mines out of the ground. You can now do the drones we talk about are the best means of doing early warning so that you can prevent conflicts as opposed to having to manage them after they occur. The smartphones, even though I was saying we have to do something about the illegal use. Right now, we're using smartphones to help refugees in camps in Lebanon to receive direct funding so that they have some kind of economic enterprise. And they're starting businesses and they're looking after themselves. So I think that there's a new technology of peacekeeping coming, and that means that we have to educate it. And I'll just give you one example. 2 months ago, I met with General Vance, who asked me to come in and talk about peacekeeping as they were planning it. And I said, one of the major issues that we have to work with countries where we want to go, whether it's Mali or somewhere else, is in the protection of cultural artifacts. They're the things that are important to their religions, things that are important to their communities, and that peacekeepers have to work very closely with the local community to make sure that those are not destroyed by the extremists who are out there. So I think peacekeeping should be, once again, the Canadian vocation. I think the present government is committed, but I think that, in particular, as I said earlier, there should be more voices promoting and supporting that kind of development. So I hope you'll think about it and do it. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, just to follow up, do you feel that we should be taking a more, I don't want to say violent, but a more violent approach, similar to our neighbors down south? How do you feel about that?
I'd ask you to repeat the question because I didn't get the key verb.
Should we be taking a more violent approach, like our neighbors down south?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I think that's very, very essential right now. And I think, there's I told you I was at this event in Ottawa yesterday where the United Nations Association, here's an example, is setting up a program called green helmets. So you're just not blue helmets going to stop conflict, you're doing green helmets to go help people fight environmental degradation so that they do irrigation, reforestation, help countries which are burning up with drought to find new sources of water. And so the idea of a green helmet peacekeeper, to me, is one of the great ideas. And I think our armed forces are very competent in doing these things. They're well trained, they're professionals, and that's what really peacekeeping is so much in desperate need of.
Hi, my name is Maren Wu, and you mentioned you mentioned ethnic cleansing, and we talk a lot about it in the news. And my question is, why is it that we are only addressing Canada's ethnic cleansing of the Indigenous peoples now?
Well, I think that we've started to address it. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a major step forward. The Charter of Rights, that goes back to 1982, made explicit definition of the rights of Indigenous people in Canada. We just had a court decision 3 months ago in the Supreme Court, the Daniels decision, that now acknowledges Métis as fully part of the being Indigenous with all the rights that go with that under the federal government. So step by step, I think where we haven't got our act together is in the actual delivery of services. We're still working under a fairly creaky federal system, federal, provincial, and I think the departments and administrations that have been doing business the old way need to kind of reset their whole level of cooperation on these matters. And I think one of the ways that are important, I'm doing some work with the Manitoba Métis Federation on a new strategic plan coming out of the Daniels decision. And one of the things that I know that the President Chartrand there wants to do is to say, we want to become self-sufficient. We don't simply want to be taking federal grant. We want to be able to operate our own businesses, to create our own health systems, to really become responsible. And I think that is that whole notion of changing the governance of Indigenous people in this country to give more responsibility for decision making is one of the key triggers to enable us to make it happen. But as I just said earlier, the fact that there's now an international convention on the rights of Indigenous people sets standards and values, and we're going to be evaluated. The United Nations is going to come here and say, hey, folks, you're not really living up to your commitments. Why just sign a treaty if you're not prepared to make it work? And I think it's those kind of things that can propel public opinion and governments to get their act together.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. But before we let you go, Dr. Axworthy, we would like to invite some of our 150&Me traveling youth participants to the stage to present a thank you on behalf of everyone here.
Okay. Hi. What's your name?
I'm Shiva.
Hi, Shiva. How are you?
I'm good.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for speaking today.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good to,
We are now going to take a break from the webcast until 1:15 Central Time so that the young people here in Winnipeg and people online can work in groups to exchange ideas. The questions that they must discuss will be posted in a few minutes.
In Winnipeg at the Human Rights Museum, we'll be moving into our breakout groups before lunch. So please, I'll ask now the youth ambassadors to stand up one at a time as I call the group numbers. You should know which group you're with, and you'll follow them to the breakout session. So we'll start with number 8. So 8 will follow Adam Young there at the back of the theater here. And 7. 7, we have Kaylin there at the back. We'll just wait for that last bit of the age group to clear. And breakout group 6. You'll be heading out there with Megan. And breakout group 5. Breakout group 3 with Maya. Breakout group 2. Breakout group 2 will be meeting with Gabrielle, and she'll lead you to the breakout room. And breakout group 1, you're with me here in the theater, so I'll meet you just up front here and we'll arrange a space. Thank you. Thank you.